The rain hammered against the windows of Murphy's Corner store in downtown Seattle, creating rivulets that distorted the neon signs outside into abstract smears of color. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the narrow aisles packed with everyday necessities. The store smelled of coffee, cleaning supplies, and the faint mustiness that came with decades of serving the neighborhood. Behind the counter, Danny Murphy wiped his hands on his apron, his eyes constantly scanning the store. At 35, he'd inherited the business from his father, and every day felt like a battle to keep it afloat. The neighborhood had changed over the years, and with it came challenges he never expected when he was a kid helping stock shelves. The bell above the door chimed, and Danny's stomach tightened. A man shuffled in, his clothes soaked through, a worn military jacket hanging loose on his thin frame. His beard was unkempt, streaked with gray, and his eyes held the distant look Danny had learned to recognize and fear. The man's boots squeaked against the linoleum as he made his way toward the back of the store. "Great," Danny muttered under his breath. He'd seen this type before: homeless veterans who wandered in, sometimes causing trouble, sometimes just looking for a warm place to escape the Seattle drizzle. His insurance premiums were already through the roof, and he couldn't afford any incidents. Before continuing, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to discover more stories about unsung heroes whose true worth isn't always visible on the surface. The man, who looked to be in his 50s, moved slowly through the aisles. His name was Marcus Thompson, though Danny didn't know that. What Danny also didn't know was that Marcus had been living in his car for the past 3 months, parked in different spots around the city to avoid the police. The car was all he had left after losing his apartment when his disability payments got tied up in bureaucratic red tape. Marcus picked up a can of soup, checking the price, then carefully counted the crumpled bills in his pocket. His hands shook slightly, not from the cold, but from something deeper, something that had started in the mountains of Afghanistan and never quite left. He'd been clean for 2 years now, but the memories and the physical pain were constant companions. "Can I help you?" Danny's voice cut through the store, sharper than intended. Marcus looked up, meeting his eyes. "Just looking for something to eat," he said quietly. His voice was rough but respectful. Danny's jaw tightened. He'd heard the stories from other shop owners: merchandise going missing, customers complaining about feeling unsafe. "You buying something or just browsing?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus nodded toward the can in his hand. "This soup, and maybe some crackers if I have enough." But Danny's patience was already wearing thin. The man's appearance, the way he moved cautiously through the store, the other customers who had glanced nervously in his direction, it all fed into Danny's growing anxiety about his business, his family's livelihood. "Look, friend," Danny said, stepping around the counter. "This isn't a shelter. You can't just come in here to get out of the rain." Marcus's eyes hardened slightly, but his voice remained calm. "I'm a paying customer." "Are you?" Danny crossed his arms. "Because I've got a business to run here, and I can't have people making my customers uncomfortable." The few other shoppers in the store had stopped what they were doing, sensing the tension. An elderly woman near the bread aisle clutched her purse tighter. A young mother pulled her child closer. Marcus set the can back on the shelf slowly, deliberately. "I served this country for 12 years, he said quietly. "I think I've earned the right to buy a can of soup." But Danny was already reaching for his phone. "Yeah, well, service doesn't give you the right to loiter in my store." Danny's fingers moved quickly across his phone screen, dialing 911 as he kept his eyes fixed on Marcus. The veteran stood motionless in the aisle, his face a mask of resignation mixed with something that might have been disappointment, not surprise, just disappointment. 911, what's your emergency? "This is Murphy's Corner store on Pine Street," Danny said, his voice low but urgent. "I need someone to remove a transient who's harassing customers." Marcus heard every word. He'd been through this before in other cities, other stores. The script was always the same. Homeless veteran equals trouble, regardless of what he'd done for his country, Regardless of the metals collecting dust in a storage unit he could no longer afford. "Sir, is the individual threatening anyone or causing property damage?" the dispatcher asked. Danny glanced at Marcus, who hadn't moved, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't done anything except exist in a space where his presence was unwanted. "He's making people uncomfortable, loitering." The other customers began to filter out, abandoning their shopping to avoid whatever scene was about to unfold. The young mother grabbed a gallon of milk and rushed to the counter, throwing a $5 bill down without waiting for change. The elderly woman shuffled past Marcus with wide eyes, clutching her purse like he might snatch it at any moment. "Officers are en route," the dispatcher informed Danny. Marcus finally moved, walking toward the door. But Danny called out, "Where do you think you're going?" "Leaving," Marcus replied simply. "Isn't that what you want?" "You can wait for the police. They'll want to talk to you." Something flickered in Marcus's eyes, a flash of the man he used to be, the soldier who had commanded respect, who had made life-and-death decisions in the mountains of Afghanistan. But it passed quickly, replaced by the weary acceptance of someone who had learned that fighting only made things worse. "I haven't done anything wrong," Marcus said. "You've been loitering, making my customers nervous." "I've been shopping," Marcus interrupted, his voice still controlled but carrying an edge now. "Or trying to." Outside, the rain continued its relentless assault on the city. Seattle's homeless population had swelled over the years, and with it, the fear and frustration of business owners like Danny who felt caught between compassion and commerce. Danny wasn't a bad man. He donated to charity, voted for politicians who promised to help veterans. But when faced with the reality of those promises, when confronted with the human cost of a system that failed its heroes, his first instinct was self-preservation. The sirens could be heard approaching, their wail cutting through the sound of rain and traffic. Marcus stood near the door, his military bearing still evident despite his circumstances. His back was straight, his hands at his sides, waiting with the patience of a man who had learned to endure. Danny felt a twinge of something, guilt, maybe, or uncertainty. The man hadn't actually done anything wrong. But the call was made, the police were coming, and there was no taking it back now. "Look," Danny said, his tone slightly softer, "I'm just trying to protect my business. You understand that, right?" Marcus turned to look at him, really look at him, and for a moment Danny saw past the beard and the worn clothes to the man underneath. "I understand," Marcus said. "I understand that my service means nothing to you. I understand that I'm invisible unless I'm a problem." The police cruiser pulled up outside, its red and blue lights painting the interior of the store in alternating colors. Two officers got out, adjusting their utility belts as they approached the door. They were young, probably hadn't been on the force for more than a few years, and they wore the expression of men who had handled calls like this before. Danny straightened his shoulders, preparing to explain the situation to the officers. Marcus simply stood there, waiting for what came next, his face showing nothing of what he was feeling inside. Officers Martinez and Chen entered the store with the practiced efficiency of cops who had responded to countless unwanted person calls. Martinez, the older of the two at 28, had kind eyes but carried himself with the authority that came with 3 years of patrol duty. Chen, barely 25, was still eager to prove himself, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. "You the owner?" Martinez asked Danny, who nodded quickly. "Danny Murphy." "Thanks for coming so fast." Danny gestured toward Marcus, who remained near the door. "This guy's been in here for 20 minutes, just wandering around, making customers nervous. I asked him to leave, but he won't go." Officer Chen approached Marcus, his posture slightly aggressive. "Sir, I need to see some identification." Marcus slowly reached into his jacket pocket, producing a worn wallet. His movements were deliberate, careful. He knew how these encounters could escalate. "Here's my driver's license," he said, handing over the card. Chen examined the ID. "Marcus Thompson. Address shows as 412 Broadway Avenue." "That address isn't current," Marcus admitted. "I'm between places right now." "So you're homeless," Chen stated matter-of-factly. The word hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus had been many things in his life: son, soldier, sergeant, leader of men in combat, but somehow homeless had become the only identifier that mattered to most people. "I'm temporarily without permanent housing," Marcus corrected, his military training evident in his precise language. Martinez stepped forward, his approach slightly more diplomatic than his partner's. "Mr. Thompson, the store owner says you've been loitering. Is that accurate?" "I was shopping," Marcus replied. "I had money to pay for items. I was looking at soup and crackers." Danny interjected, "He was in here for 20 minutes, just wandering around. My customers were getting uncomfortable." "Did he threaten anyone?" Martinez asked. "Steal anything? Cause any actual disturbance?" Danny hesitated. When put that way, it sounded different. "Well, no, but nothing," Marcus said quietly. "I served my country for 12 years, 3 tours in Afghanistan. I came in here to buy food, and suddenly I'm a criminal because I don't look like your typical customer." Chen's expression didn't change. "Sir, regardless of your service record, if the business owner wants you to leave, you need to respect that. Even if I'm a paying customer." "Even then," Chen replied, the injustice of it settled over Marcus like a familiar weight. He'd fought for this country, had bled for it, had watched good men die for it, and now he couldn't even buy a can of soup without being treated like a threat. Martinez, sensing the tension, tried a different approach. "Look, Mr. Thompson, I can see you're a veteran. Thank you for your service, but we need to resolve this situation peacefully." The words felt hollow to Marcus. "Thank you for your service," the phrase everyone used when they wanted to feel better about how veterans were actually treated. It was easier to mouth the words than to actually help. "What exactly am I being accused of?" Marcus asked. "Trespassing," Chen replied quickly. "The business owner has asked you to leave." "After I identified myself as a customer with money to spend," Marcus pointed out. Danny felt increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. The veteran wasn't wrong. He hadn't actually done anything illegal, but Danny's fear and prejudice had already set things in motion. "I just want him to leave," Danny said. "Find somewhere else to shop." "Somewhere that serves my kind?" Marcus asked, a bitter edge creeping into his voice. "I didn't say that," Danny protested. "You didn't have to." Outside, the rain continued its steady drumbeat against the windows. Inside, the confrontation had reached a stalemate. The police couldn't arrest someone for trying to shop while homeless, but they also couldn't ignore a business owner's request to remove someone from his property. Martinez was about to suggest they all step outside to discuss the matter further when the bell above the door chimed again. A man entered, shaking rain from his military-style jacket. He was in his 40s, with graying hair cut in a precise military style, and carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of a career officer. His eyes took in the scene immediately: the 2 police officers, the nervous store owner, and the homeless veteran standing with the resigned dignity of someone who had been in this situation before. The newcomer's gaze settled on Marcus, and his expression changed from casual observation to something much more intense. "Marcus," he said, his voice carrying both disbelief and recognition. "Marcus Thompson." The man who had just entered removed his rain-soaked jacket, revealing the insignia of a lieutenant colonel on his uniform shirt. His name tape read Harrison, and the green beret tucked under his arm left no doubt about his elite military background. Colonel James Harrison had spent 22 years in the Army, 15 of those with Special Forces, and he commanded respect wherever he went. But right now, his attention was completely focused on the homeless man standing near the door. "Jesus Christ, Marcus, it is you," Harrison said, stepping forward. The police officers instinctively moved aside, recognizing military authority even out of their jurisdiction. Marcus looked up, and for the first time since entering the store, his face showed genuine emotion, surprise mixed with something that might have been hope. "Colonel Harrison. It's been, 4 years?" Harrison's voice was warm, cutting through the tension in the store like a blade. Since you retired from the service. Officer Martinez cleared his throat. Sir, we're in the middle of handling a situation here. Harrison turned to face the officers, and his demeanor shifted to full command mode. What kind of situation? Chen stepped forward, eager to explain. Trespassing complaint. Business owner wants this individual removed from the premises. This individual, Harrison's voice could have frozen the rain outside. This individual has a name. Sergeant First Class Marcus Thompson, United States Army, retired. He looked at Danny, then back at the officers. And you're treating him like what, exactly? Danny felt the ground shifting beneath him. Look, I didn't know he was. Was what? Harrison interrupted. A decorated combat veteran, someone who spent 12 years defending your right to own this store. He moved to stand beside Marcus, a gesture of solidarity that wasn't lost on anyone present. Marcus, tell me what happened here. Marcus's voice was steady as he recounted the events. Came in to buy soup and crackers, had the money to pay. Store owner called me a loiterer, said I was making customers uncomfortable. Called the police. Harrison listened without interruption, his face growing darker with each word. When Marcus finished, the colonel turned to Danny. So let me understand this. A paying customer entered your establishment, and you called the police because you didn't like how he looked. I run a business, Danny said defensively. I have to think about my other customers. Your other customers, Harrison repeated. Tell me, do you know what this man did in Afghanistan? Danny shook his head, suddenly feeling very small. Harrison's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed. In 2019, Sergeant Thompson's unit was ambushed in the Kunar province. IED took out their lead vehicle, sniper fire from 3 directions. Marcus here organized the defense, called in air support, and then, when Private Rodriguez was pinned down in a kill zone, he went out there alone to get him. The store had gone completely silent, except for the rain against the windows. Took 2 rounds in the leg, 1 in the shoulder, Harrison continued. Kept fighting, kept his men alive. All of them came home because of what Marcus did that day. He received the Bronze Star with valor for that action. Officer Martinez shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the kind of call he'd expected. But that's not why I know Marcus, Harrison said, his voice softening slightly. I know him because 3 months later, my convoy hit an IED outside Kandahar. Vehicle rolled, I was trapped inside, fuel everywhere. Marcus was part of the quick reaction force that responded. He looked directly at Marcus. You pulled me out of that burning vehicle, saved my life. Danny felt sick. I didn't know. Of course you didn't know, Harrison snapped, because you didn't bother to find out. You saw what you expected to see and acted on your prejudices. He turned to address the officers. Officers, I trust this complaint is being withdrawn. Martinez looked at Danny, who nodded quickly. Yes, absolutely. The complaint is withdrawn. Good, Harrison's tone suggested the matter was settled, but his eyes remained hard as he looked at each person in the store. Marcus, you still trying to buy that soup? Marcus nodded, pulling out his crumpled bills. Put your money away, Harrison said. Then he looked at Danny. The store owner is going to give you whatever you need. Isn't that right, Mr. Murphy? Danny nodded eagerly. Yes, of course, whatever he wants on the house. But Marcus shook his head. I appreciate it, Colonel, but I can pay for my own food. Harrison smiled for the first time since entering the store. Still got that pride, Marcus? Good, but let me buy you dinner. It's the least I can do for the man who saved my life. An hour later, Marcus and Colonel Harrison sat in a booth at the diner 2 blocks from Murphy's Corner store. The Formica table between them was scarred from decades of use, and the coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but it was warm and dry, and for the first time in months, Marcus felt like he belonged somewhere. So tell me what happened, Harrison said, wrapping his hands around his coffee cup. Last I heard, you were doing well, had that job with the security company. Marcus stared into his coffee, the steam rising like ghosts of better times. Company downsized, let a lot of veterans go, said we were overqualified for the positions they had left. Couldn't find work after that. Employers would see the resume, see the military service, the PTSD notation from the VA, and suddenly the position would be filled. Harrison's jaw tightened. He'd seen this story too many times, good soldiers chewed up by a system that praised their service while failing to support their transition to civilian life. The VA disability payments got tied up in red tape for 8 months, Marcus continued. Appeals, reviews, more paperwork. Landlord wasn't interested in waiting. Lost the apartment, lost most of my stuff. Been living in my car since September. Why didn't you call me, call any of us? Marcus looked up from his coffee. Pride, I guess. Same pride that made me want to pay for that soup myself. Hard to ask for help when you're supposed to be the one giving it. Harrison leaned back in the booth. Marcus, you saved my life. You saved Rodriguez's life and Williams's and half a dozen others I could name. You think that debt just disappears because you're having a rough patch. Before Marcus could answer, Harrison's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then smiled. That's my wife. I texted her about running into you. She says, and I quote, bring that hero home for dinner immediately or sleep on the couch. Marcus actually laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd had in months. Sarah always was direct. Still is, runs her own nonprofit now, helping veterans transition to civilian careers. She's going to want to hear your story, and not for the reasons you think. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Two soldiers who had shared the crucible of combat and understood each other in ways that civilians never could. Outside, Seattle's evening rush hour was beginning, streams of people heading home to warm houses and families who worried about them. I keep thinking about that store owner, Marcus said finally. Danny, he wasn't evil, just scared. Scared I'd steal something, scare his customers, hurt his business somehow. You're more understanding than I am, Harrison replied. The man called the police on you for shopping while homeless. Yeah, but think about it from his perspective. He's probably struggling to keep his business afloat, dealing with insurance costs, crime, difficult customers. He sees someone who looks like me and assumes the worst because that's what the news tells him, what his fears tell him. Harrison shook his head in amazement. After everything you've been through, you're still trying to see the good in people. Has to be good in people, Colonel. Otherwise, what were we fighting for over there? The question hung between them, profound in its simplicity. Harrison had known many heroes in his career, had served alongside men who had earned medals for extraordinary acts of courage. But real heroism, he was beginning to understand, wasn't just about what you did in moments of crisis. It was about how you carried yourself through the everyday struggles, how you maintained your dignity and humanity when the world seemed determined to strip both away from you. I have a proposition, Harrison said. Sarah's nonprofit is expanding. We need someone to run the veteran outreach program, someone who understands what these guys are going through because he's lived it. The pay is decent, comes with health benefits, and there's an apartment above the office that goes with the job. Marcus looked at him suspiciously. You're not offering me charity. Hell no, I'm offering you a job. A chance to help other veterans avoid what you've been through. Think you're interested? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the city that had both failed and redeemed him in the space of a single afternoon. What about Danny, the store owner? What about him? He learned something today, saw something he didn't expect.